Here we go. Okay, here we go maybe, huh? Okay, he's got that up and... okay, welcome very much to Conversations. Welcome to the program again for another time of many programs we've done, and a prelude to the many that we're going to be doing in the future, hopefully, with Howard Bloom, who is a person to whom I have given great attention, and I would recommend to one and all, a major intellectual, interested and a major contributor to understanding the human condition and the universe condition, and has a very wide, comprehensive understanding of things. And as you can see, he's the author of a book, The God Problem, How a Godless Cosmos Creates, which is a major tour de force, in my view, in terms of intellectual history and understanding. And as we may learn on this particular program, he's taken some time out not only to consider all the aspects of physics and the universe and so forth, but he's got some considerable important understanding on geopolitics as well as that. And Howard, so happy to welcome you to Conversations one more time.
Harold,
so good to welcome.
It's always great to see you.
Always good to see you. You've been active as always. And so let's give a real quick rundown about the book, okay? Let people know, because it's doing well and it's getting an awful lot of attention in high intellectual circles. So let's talk a little bit about the book and the the overall pattern of your life and that sort of thing. And then we do want to get to some of the your understandings of the current geopolitical situation, including what's going on in Syria and so forth, very much all current in the news now. But give a little rundown of the book and your own background in a sense.
Well, the book confronts a very simple problem. If let's imagine that one day you wake up and discover that you don't really believe in God, okay?
Yeah.
And once you've discovered that, you're up against a problem. If there was no God saying, "Let there be light," how in the world did we get light? If there was no
godless
cosmos created, if there's no God parting the heavens and the seas, how in the world did we get heavens and seas?
And that's a problem that's confronting the intellectual understanding of things, particularly in our time.
Right.
Yeah.
And science, because it's preoccupied with reductionism, tends to break things apart to their elements, to things like elementary particles, and becomes obsessed with breaking things down, taking things apart, not understanding.
Not only science, the whole intellectual enterprise seems to be reduced to reductionism by and large. You divide and conquer, one might say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the creative aspect of the cosmos, how you
Put
create...
it this way, just a little bit. So, a little bit
how you create a big bang from nothing.
Right.
How that big bang, which is nothing but a spreading sheet of space and time, precipitates into the very first things. Things, there have never been things before.
Right,
how in the world did that happen? Those are quarks.
Right.
How the quarks how the quarks come together as the first protons and neutrons when there have never been protons or neutrons or anything of the sort in the universe before.
You think it's something to do with black and white holes and parallel universes and string theory?
No, because that assumes that there's already a bunch of stuff here.
Well, there would have
and the big question is, how do you get parallel universes? How do you get strings? How do you get any of those things?
That just finesses the overall issue,
yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, I know,
so
but it's still interesting.
So the big question
is... And
it
does leave us synergetically wondering about uncertainty.
Well, synergy is an essential part of the process.
Yeah,
I mean, we get 300,000 to 380,000 years into the life of the universe, and you've got these things called protons and these things electrons called bouncing around, ricocheting off of each other at top speed, and that's all they've ever done, Harold, is ricochet off of each other.
Right.
And if you and I are sitting at a coffee table at the beginning of the universe and we've been watching this whole thing, and you're the crazy visionary and I'm the crusty old fart, and you say, I got a prediction for you. See those little things, relatively speaking, the size of your fist, and see those things, relatively speaking, the size of the Empire State Building? Those things that have been bouncing off of each other like bullets hitting each other head on for 380,000 years now, and you come up with a crazy prediction. Things are going to slow down, and when they slow down, these little things, relatively speaking, the size of your fist, are going to discover they have an inanimate longing. These things the size of the Empire State Building are going to discover they have an inanimate longing. And guess what? The inanimate longing of these teensy-weensy little things is going to fit the inanimate longing of these things the size of the Empire State Building absolutely perfectly. Harold, I know you're crazy. That can't possibly be. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't fit any of the logic that we know. Not at all. And guess what? That's exactly what happens. And worse than that, once those little things discover their irresistible attraction to the giant, great big things, they discover that there's a perfect distance, a sphere, that never existed before, in which they can circle around that great big thing.
Yeah.
And then you make another of your wacky predictions.
Yeah.
You say, these things are going to all of a sudden startle us with properties this cosmos has never seen. Let's call property number 1 an atom. Let's call property number 2 hydrogen. And I say, Harold, this is bizarre. How can you possibly say such a thing? The big things are called protons. The little things are called electrons.
Yeah.
And garbage in, garbage out. You put a proton in and an electron in, and what do you get? A proton plus an electron. That's all. You don't get a wacky thing called an atom. You don't get this wacky stuff called hydrogen.
And yet you do.
And you do. And the big question is, how in the world does
There's
something
a lot
like
of
that
hows
happen?
out there to be dealing with.
A lot of hows.
Right,
I mean, you know, that my YouTube series. I have a Bloom channel now.
Yeah. Do you? I did.
Yes,
okay, good. Yeah.
And the opening for the for each YouTube episode is, ready for this? Want to know why? Ask how. Howard, the humongous. So there's how in there all over the place.
That's well done. That's good enunciation. Yeah.
Well, I like to do radio voices. It's a lot of fun.
Right. So you've been interested in all that kind of stuff. You've written a book. The book is out of sight, I have to tell you that, in the intellectual history, right down through to the modern era. And you write on the intellectual history of the people in 19th century England and that sort of thing, the Enlightenment, Huxley's and Darwin and all, and you write so well. It's just absolutely engrossing. Couldn't put it down. I had to read the whole book. It's recommended entirely.
Yeah.
I see here you picked up another accolade or something, and Mr. Gilder you had a contact with.
Well, George Gilder.
He's way out on the right wing.
Yeah,
right?
two people fell in love with the book. One was Barbara Ehrenreich, who's way over on the left, right? And the other one is George Gilder, who's way over on the right. For people who don't know who George Gilder is,
Wealth and Poverty.
He wrote a book called Wealth and Poverty, and a guy named Ronald Reagan, who was in a place called the White House, fell in love with Wealth and Poverty and kept a copy on his desk. So George Gilder became a major intellectual force of the Reagan administration on the right, and then became a technology columnist for Forbes, but far more than a technology columnist.
He's an intellectual. He's an intellectual,
He's an amazing figure.
And
then there's Barbara Ehrenreich, who's way over on the left of things. So George at one point said, well, Barbara Ehrenreich is in love with your stuff, and I'm in love with your stuff. Do you think you should introduce me to Barbara? Well, this
Get them
Barbara,
together, absolutely.
Well, Barbara had been his intellectual enemy for decades.
You're likely to start a new weapon of mass destruction or a bomb.
Well, these are amazing people. They have amazing minds.
And you're able to reach out like that. So you're able to touch with a lot of different things, and that's energetic. That's really reaching out to a comprehensive thing. And that's what we need.
And that's
we don't
what we're trying.
need
Yes, that's
more
what creativity. Creativity works like that.
So you're interested virtually in everything. I've had this idea the universities have been, the intellectual community of the universities have been co-opted, if that's the right term, or divided and conquered by reductionism, by highly specialized minds that cannot think comprehensively in patterns.
They certainly
That makes some sense to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you think in patterns practically all.
Well, I founded this thing called omnology.
Omnology is the name
omnology
of it.
is for kids in their sophomore year of college who are interested in biology, they're interested in art history, and they're interested in film. And people say to them, schmuck, wake up.
Yeah, you've got to get specialized.
Yeah, exactly. Until you decide.
It's because of economics, I think, the specialization.
It's a habit. It's a habit of thought. It's, we develop these cultural habits, and they linger for generation after generation. And one of the astonishing revelations of the God problem is that one of the reasons we have trouble dealing with the creativity of the cosmos is because we're dealing with a set of intellectual tools left over from 2,300 years ago, 2,300 years ago. Aristotle,
Aristotle and Pericles in Greece.
Well, and those tools served us well for a long time, but 2,300 years, isn't that a long time to hold on to a bunch of intellectual tools without recognizing that periodically you have to upgrade your toolkit?
Well, there has been some upgrade, has there not? There's been some progress made, or they keep even we're going to be talking about Islam. And Islam even is talking. It came 700 or something, and
600.
But it connected us back to and saved the classical tradition. So people still can capture the classical with everlasting or evergreen philosophical principles and so forth that are good forever and everything. That
well,
kind of
we
thing,
use
which
this.
is
We use
a little
this.
bit stasis in their thinking.
We use this thing called logic.
Yeah.
And we don't question it.
Yeah.
And it is not an absolute. It's something that Aristotle put together, cobbled together, 2,300 years ago.
There were some pretty unique things going on in there.
Right.
Yeah, empirically in Greece.
And Aristotle said, look, if you take things and you break them down to what he called their elements, and you then discover, and this was a weird, wacky use of a metaphor, there were these things that Hammurabi had chiseled into stone, these rules of human conduct that were called laws. Okay, so Aristotle said you can find the laws of these
universe.
Elements.
Yeah,
and if you discover the laws of the elements, you'll know how everything works.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? We've been doing that ever since. Look at our obsession right now with particle physics, breaking things down. Now, Harold, if you take a teacup and smash it on the floor and then smash it over and over again until you get the smallest pieces, and you come to understand the laws of those smallest pieces, will you ever understand how a teacup was manufactured?
I don't think so.
No, you certainly won't. You absolutely won't.
But they think they're looking for quark or the boson. Didn't they get the Higgs boson or something in that process when the accelerator?
Yes, they think they found. It's a statistical probability that they found it. It's not a definite
no, but that's
thing.
the part. That's quantum mechanics.
That's quantum mechanics. But unfortunately, again, we are breaking the teacup into pieces, and we are failing to look at how you manufacture the cup to begin with.
Right. Well, that's pattern recognition. Perhaps.
Yes,
well,
we're destroying.
Comprehensiveness.
Yeah, we're destroying the comprehensive pattern. We're just and then we're failing to see that the comprehensive pattern is the real mystery. That isn't the pieces you can break the teacup into. Yeah, that's important. That's nice.
Who have been the figures that have been able to maintain or establish a principle by which such can be done? That is, look at the pattern. Who are the major thinkers who have thought that way? There have been some who have been able to be moving in that direction. And who are some of the major figures that are in that tradition? I like Fuller, as you know, Bucky Fuller.
Well, there's a Buckminster Fuller film being made. It's already, it's a documentary. It has already been written up twice in the New York Times. It has some sort of a deal with PBS. And the person making the film drove his 67-foot-long RV complete with a studio into Park Slope, Brooklyn on Monday night to interview the person that he felt he needed for this film, and guess who it was?
Bloom. Good, really? Is that true?
Absolutely.
Who's doing that? Is that
his name is Noel Murphy.
Okay, good. Put me in touch. I'd like to be in touch with him.
He's had his own TV show out on the West Coast in Santa Cruz and all kinds of stuff.
And he's a
stand-up comedian. I don't know how he got into Buckminster Fuller, but nonetheless, it's a major film about Buckminster Fuller.
Good, I'm glad to hear that,
Right. And yes, Buckminster Fuller is one of those figures. Leonardo da Vinci is one of those figures. He felt that you could combine the comprehension that you get from the visual arts and sculpture and science and logic and philosophy and mechanics and engineering, and you could put all those things together into one big picture. The man who was really responsible is a man whose name is either derogated, people loathe it, or they don't know it at all, and that's Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer in the 19th century was the most famous philosopher in the English language of the 19th century.
Was it true?
Yes, absolutely.
Spencer.
Absolutely. And at the time, the idea that anybody else in the 19th century would be anywhere near as well known as Herbert Spencer seemed laughable. Today, he's forgotten. But Herbert Spencer tried to put together what he called a synthetic philosophy, a comprehensive philosophy that would encompass everything, absolutely everything.
Okay, well, that was a good guide. That was a good thing.
But there are very few.
And did he fit in with the West? There was a lot of shaking going on in 19th century England.
And everybody was paying attention to Herbert Spencer because Herbert Spencer was not just engaged mentally with biology and physiology and evolution. He was the one who came up with the use of the word evolution in the English language. He came up with a phrase called the theory of evolution.
What years are you
roughly 1852 to 1904.
52. Oh, that.
Those are the years of his intellectual activity.
Okay,
And so he did come up with the phrase theory of evolution long before Darwin. He came up with the phrase survival of the fittest. And he popularized the use of the word evolution. If you look at Darwin's first book, which is his journal of his voyage of the Beagle, it doesn't use the word evolution once.
Is that a fact?
But Herbert Spencer was using it all over the place.
He also wrote on Auguste Comte and positivism.
Well, that's the thing. The word Auguste Comte was having a tremendous influence in the early 1850s, late 1840s in England, on a little group of people who met around a dinner table at the home of the publisher, John Chapman. And in those days, there was no such thing as an office, and there was no such thing as an office building.
There was a dinner table around which one could gather.
That's right. If you had a building that housed your business, it was called an establishment, and it was like a hotel. It was like a giant rooming house. And so if you were John Chapman and you were a publisher, you would have people like Marian Evans, who would later be known as George Eliot. You would have people like Emerson from the United States. You would have, what's his name, who said, "Go West, young man," who popularized the phrase, "Go West, young man." Helped found the, Horace Greeley. You'd have Karl Marx. You'd have Dickens. All these people would show up at your dinner table. And stars of the dinner table included Herbert Spencer, John Stuart Mill, and of course Marian Evans, otherwise known as George Eliot. And the three of them, George Eliot, Marian Evans, the guy who eventually became her boyfriend and her lover, and one of the most flagrant affairs of the 19th century, one of the most flagrant sexual affairs, George Henry Lewes. Harriet Martineau, another one who showed up at the table. All of these were obsessed with Auguste Comte. And what were they getting out of Auguste Comte? The concept of, they were getting the concept of evolution. They were getting the concept of progressivism. They were getting the concept that the universe progresses. And all of those things, evolution is still with us, thanks to Charles Darwin. And Thomas Huxley was another one who showed up at that table.
The whole Huxley family was amazing. You had Aldous and you had Julian. Julian was a great biologist.
The publisher had bought a publication, Chapman had bought a publication called the Westminster Review. And he brought in a young woman who had written an absolutely scandalous, she had translated an absolutely scandalous book from the German that portrayed Jesus Christ as just a normal human being, which was considered, oh my God, hellish. So Chapman brought her in from Coventry. Bear with me for a second. And he brought her in from Coventry, and he put her up at his establishment in one of the bedrooms. He had a bedroom for his wife and bedrooms for his kids, and he had a bedroom for his mistresses. And they had a brief affair, and he put her to work editing the Westminster Review. Meantime, there's this guy who had just been a naturalist on a ship, and when he'd gotten off the ship, he didn't have a penny. He was penniless. He didn't have any money to write up even what he had done on the ship. And so Marian Evans, the editor of the Westminster Review now for John Chapman, gave him a job as the science reporter for the Westminster Review. His name was Thomas Henry Huxley, otherwise known as, later he would be known as Darwin's Bulldog. So this whole bunch of people that established the idea of evolution got started at Chapman's dinner table. And of course the whole story of Chapman's dinner table and what it means for your thinking and mine is in this book.
Among a lot of other things that are in this book. It's a really good book. And all of that said and everything, that's getting us into the human experience and all that sort of thing, as well as the physics and all of that, all of which you deal with at various levels that can be understood by a great variety of people and admired by a great number. And the accolades for the book are legion, and it's to be recommended. But you've also been interested in a thing that's a little more contemporary in terms of what we get on the television and news and so on, in geopolitics.
Well, now remember, these people at Chapman's table, they were not just obsessed with physics. They were not just obsessed with how the universe managed to coalesce and with biology, and they were obsessed with all of these things. But they were also obsessed with politics. Absolutely obsessed with geopolitics. It was the age of the great upheavals.
Politics, geopolitics, there's a little difference.
Remember, it was 1848.
Big year.
Right, and in 1848 there were revolutions. There were 50 revolutions. They spanned the globe, Harold. They absolutely spanned the globe. And the revolutionaries would show up, guess where, when they came to London? They would show up at Chapman's table.
Chapman's place.
Right, exactly. So there is a history for those of us who are comprehensivists, if you want to call us that.
Try to be,
omnologists. Who have aspirations, who have aspirations to omniscience.
To getting getting toward, yes, all right,
yeah,
why not?
Of getting into politics. So in my case, I call this mass behavior, and it goes from the mass behavior of quarks to the mass behavior of humans. And it means that in 2005, I was flown to Moscow to address an international conference of quantum physicists about why everything they know about Schrödinger's equation and quantum physics is wrong. And then 5 years later, I got a call from my collaborator in theoretical physics, Pavel Karakin, of the Keldysh Institute of Applied Mathematics of the Russian Academy of Sciences, saying, Howard, Dr. Uzhikov, who put together that conference you talked to, has just written a book. You've got to download it immediately. So I downloaded it, and I was shocked.
Why?
The first half of the book was filled with every concept that I had delivered in this lecture, shattering everything you know about theory. I thought they were going to throw me out of the conference, Harold, for saying that everything they know about theoretical physics.
What does that tell us? What does it tell us about the scientific establishment and the paradigms that are set, and then the one who comes in and rolls the bowling ball at the pins?
It says two things. It says, first of all, that they may be a little bit more open-minded in Moscow than they are in Washington.
Oh, that's a thought.
And it says that sometimes you can walk into a session thinking that you're going to shock everybody by saying that everything they know is wrong. And in fact, what you've done,
will welcome it.
You've expressed something that's been boiling under the surface for a long time that they've never been able to articulate before.
As well as, particularly if you've got a good explanation of what is maybe right. Is that important to have that?
It's extraordinarily important. It goes back to what you said, pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is what it's all about. In the case of the teacup,
it's not enough just to be destructive.
It's not enough to be destructive at all. No, you have to put together the picture in a whole new way.
Something that can move toward that. I think maybe that's something that's lacking in the contemporary
You have to be able to say, see all these crumbs on the floor that we made by smashing and smashing over again, put them together in the right manner, and you can use them to pour tea
or
and
if you're gonna,
bring the tea to your lips.
And also if you're going to question the reification of the institutions out of a historical pattern, then you ought to somewhere be in the political realm or in the realm of reality, being able to set up something that relates to the future rather than just the reified past.
Yes, exactly.
Important
That's
idea
absolutely
that's lacking,
important.
Perhaps in a comprehensive way.
You have to be able to at least point a direction toward an order that goes beyond the present order.
And a responsibility that may be overlooked. You can just call. There's a lot of angst in the world. There's a lot of criticism of things in the world, but there's very little something that really seems new in terms of putting a new patina is the wrong word. A new pattern that can be a borning.
And I can't say
And the principles by which new patterns might be a borning in a comprehensively understood universe.
Well, and to get those patterns takes a word that you use all the time, and that word is synergy.
I like it,
If you go back to the story of the proton and the electron, these two unlikely partners, and what came out of their partnership, all of these emergent properties, the atom, the hydrogen. Well, things work that way in political life too. You put together people in unusual ways, you get them to recognize that they have first, opposites are joined to the hip. That's a very important principle in this book. So it's not an either-or situation in most cases. Should we have competition or should we have cooperation? It's not an either-or proposition. If you have too much cooperation and no competition, you have a system that's dead.
It's boring.
If you have too much competition and not enough collaboration, not enough cooperation, you have a system that's dead. You have a chaos. You need a yeasty balance. It's like a recipe, you know? You can't say, okay, gee,
like the beginning of the universe.
It's like the beginning of the universe, and it's like bread. And here's how it's like bread. You can't walk into somebody's kitchen, watch how they make bread, see that they take a bunch of flour and put it together with a bunch of water and put in some yeast and maybe an egg, and put it in the oven and say, I got the secret. The secret to this is flour. Because if you just take the flour and you put it in a pan and you stick it in the oven at 350 degrees, okay, then I've changed my mind. The secret is really the water. Okay, put the water in the oven for 350 degrees by itself, and what do you get? Nowhere. It's a
combination of active ingredients.
Yes, exactly.
Alka-Seltz used to use that.
And a combination of active ingredients will sometimes produce something far larger than anything you imagined when you put the ingredients together
Hence,
to begin
people
with.
might be able to welcome somebody who comes in and says, I'm going to destroy everything you're thinking and everything. Oh, good. Something new might emerge. That kind of attitude is intrinsic to science. Or the intellectual enterprise.
We hope it's intrinsic to science.
It ought to be.
We hope that it's intrinsic to the intellectual enterprise.
It ought to be encouraged among the useful
That's right.
things.
But in reality, it is discouraged in science. In reality, it is discouraged in the intellectual enterprise. And by the institutional structures
of the material world, including economic peer review, recognition, and all that sort of thing.
But you are right. It is absolutely essential. You need those people who will come in as outsiders, question the whole thing, and show you at least a hint of how to put things together in a whole new way.
Yeah, right. And that's what it's going. Now, on to the thing that we're talking about now, because it's all in the news, and you've been, geopolitics is something I paid some attention to when I was thinking and everything, but it's the relationship between the nations and that sort of thing, and there's been all in the news now recently, and apparently you've been very active.
Well, for the last 2 years,
you have all kinds of people coming to get counsel with you and to do things, including life possibilities on Mars and all kinds of things that are going on out of your very active life, for which we could go into each one at great depth. But you've been looking at the situation in the country of Syria and in that part of the world, and you've given some considerable attention to it, and you've been invited to do so within television circles represented around the world and so forth. Maybe it's worth talking about some of your own personal experience.
Well, the Syrian thing for the last, I've been obsessed with geopolitics since I was a kid, which doesn't turn out to be unusual because Herbert Spencer and Marian Evans and John Stuart Mill were all obsessed about politics too.
Okay, now you said in the first part of your sentence, you said geopolitics, and the other you said in politics. Now, there's politics and then geopolitics. They're different.
Well, my interest tends to be geopolitics.
Geopolitics, that's the linking of geography and politics.
Yeah, exactly.
I was a geographer.
Right, okay. And why geopolitics? Because it's the big picture. It's where things are interesting. It's where other people aren't bothering to look. And one of the most important things you can do in science is to look where other people aren't.
Look at
to
the
step
territory.
Outside the circle. You know, there's a circle of a spotlight. It's focused on things like elementary particles. Your job, if you really want to be a scientist, step outside the circle. Step outside the spotlight. Look in the darkness. Bring things from the darkness into the light.
You're going to court the derision of those who are very focused on that way that you are stepping out of.
Well, maybe, yes.
You're subject to that kind of snooty kind of
absolutely.
Right? Has it ever happened to you?
Oh, yes. The editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, I was writing for, they had invited me to write for Wired. I did some stuff for them. And then the editor-in-chief, through my editor, slipped me a question. And the question was,
who the hell do you think you are, young
basically,
man?
It was, do you think that you are a journalist like Malcolm Gladwell, or do you think that you're a scientist like Einstein? Well, Einstein was my role model when I was 12 years old. So of course I think that I want to be a scientist like Einstein, not a Malcolm Gladwell. And when I answered that, well, and this guy's a physicist, the guy who was the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine at the time.
Okay,
but that means he's a conventional physicist. That means he sits in the middle of the establishment. That means his credential is a credential. His credential is his PhD, not the originality of his thought.
All right.
At all.
Okay.
And it's the originality of your thought that makes you a scientist, in my opinion.
Okay, that's an interesting premise. Yeah, it's worth thinking about.
However, the idea that I regarded myself as a scientific thinker was anathema to him. Absolute anathema.
Where's your P and where's your H and where's your D?
Right, exactly. So he and I stopped working together
where's
at that point.
Your peer-reviewed articles that have
Well, I do have peer-reviewed articles. And my peer-reviewed articles are in arXiv, which is one of the leading outlets for advanced mathematics and theoretical physics.
Well, that's unfortunate. You do have a couple of those. Because I'd rather you didn't have any of those, but reading popular mechanics.
But I do have some. However, in Wikipedia, in the article on me, which is very inaccurate, it leaves out most of my scientific background.
Who put it together? Is my life. You could have it. How is it redone? How do you get it redone?
It's you can't influence your own articles on Wikipedia. They're really against that. So basically, so I have all these peer-reviewed. It's not a lot, but I have this little batch of peer-reviewed articles, and they go from Physica Plus, which is a physics outlet, arXiv, which is a physics and mathematics outlet, to New Ideas in Psychology, and a couple of others that are in physiology and
Pretty
psychology.
wide nest you're casting there, young man.
Now these are the most substantive.
You can't possibly know what I know about the nature of the
Well, the basic thing is that Wikipedia strips those out.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow those in the article. Usually at the bottom they do have bibliography. But they won't allow it in my case because they would prefer to portray me as somebody who doesn't have any of these credentials at all.
Right. Well, that's the snootiness of the thing, yeah. But anyway, so we're getting off on an arcane thing, geopolitics.
Well, the geopolitics thing, the thing you really wanted to get into is Syria.
Well, it relates to geography. It relates to the location. It relates to the on-the-ground realities.
Not really. I wouldn't limit it that way.
And it has certain philosophies involved.
Just geopolitics in general, at least the way I understand it, simply means covering the world. It simply means looking at a vast variety of cultures and coming to understand them, not coming to understand them in the terms that the New York Times gives us or the Washington Post gives us, which are very Americanocentric. But looking at them on their own terms, looking at them in terms of their own rhetoric, in terms of their own history, in terms of their own way of perceiving the world. The various establishments
for the various state systems that exist around the world, are you talking about?
Yeah.
Or the international order?
Well, there are perceptual, separate perceptual systems. A culture is a perceptual system. And if you really want to understand a culture, don't look at it in American terms, look at it in its own terms. Try to understand how a person in that culture views the world. And you'll come to understand something very, very quickly. This book has a lot about axioms, about assumptions, the assumptions underlying a culture. Ours come, many of them, from Aristotle. Well, different cultures have different starting assumptions.
Yeah, sure.
And because they have different starting assumptions, they come to very different conclusions that seem totally logical.
To them.
Yeah, to them. So when we started to confront Osama bin Laden back in the 1990s, when he declared war against us, and he did declare war against us, just a long and very eloquent document. But it's not. If you
Kaczynski did too, you know, but
but there's a difference. Kaczynski was one man in the woods sending out some bombs. Al-Qaeda is a worldwide movement. It now has.
We associate Al-Qaeda with Osama, then?
Yes,
is that
Al-Qaeda was the founding figure.
There were some other people that led up to that then.
Yes, there were other people that led up, but remember, there were other people that led up to George Washington, and still George Washington is the greatest symbol for the United States of America.
Yeah, right.
And Osama bin Laden is the George Washington of Al-Qaeda. And so what he says counts. But if you read any of his documents, for example, his proclamation of war against the United States, you won't understand a word of it. Not a word. Why? Because he is not referring to any of the concepts that we think or what count in politics. He's referring to a whole different history, a whole different vocabulary of concepts. And until you understand those concepts, you can't walk in his shoes. And what does Sun Tzu tell you about having an enemy? He tells you you're not going to win until you can walk in the other person's shoes.
And he was out in China many years ago.
Right, roughly 220 BC.
Still read avidly at the academy.
Right, and he was quite right. And so I spent about 10 years trying to crack Osama bin Laden's code. Collecting,
you did, really?
Yes, collecting everything he wrote. Absolutely everything.
I didn't know you had done
that.
Is there any of that in the book or no?
No, none of that's in the book at all. You can only fit so much stuff in one book.
Yeah, right. There's only so many pages.
We'll do our nose adjustments simultaneously
nose
here.
Jobs,
right, exactly.
Okay.
So, and it turns out, well, then I wrote a book. And I wrote a book that was originally called the Osama Code because it was cracking the code of Osama's vocabulary. And the worldview, the big picture that makes sense of it, the teacup. Not the little bits and pieces, the teacup.
What did you find out? What are some of the findings, and what is your thought?
Basically, that there once upon a time was a guy named Muhammad. And he was in a cave one day, meditating, and all of a sudden he felt a breathlessness. It was something that seized him around the chest. He had a very inchoate experience. It scared the hell out of him. He wondered, he thought he was going mad or becoming a poet. And to him, either being mad or being a poet were two of the worst things that could possibly happen to you in life. I'm serious. He was very disturbed. And his wife, Aisha, took him off to a cousin of hers who was Christian with Jewish roots, and the cousin said, I know exactly what's wrong with you. The Jews have been waiting for a Messiah. You're it. Yeah. You were grabbed around the chest by Gabriel, the angel of God. And Gabriel, the angel of God, was telling you, read, read, read. Well, Muhammad couldn't read. Yeah. But Judaism has to do with a book. Yeah, right. You know? Yeah. So he became convinced that he was the Messiah for the Jews, the person who would deliver the Jewish people. And he went to the Jewish people. Yeah, and he said, hey, I'm the Messiah. And the Jews wanted to have nothing to do with him. The Jews, you know, have had it up to here with false prophets. It's a big deal in Judaism, rejecting false prophets.
Well, that's part of the prophetic tradition that is holding. Well, I think there's a difference because you have the 12th Imam in Shia Thea. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, but that's much later in the history of Islam.
Well, that's coming up to the present. Yeah.
So he started preaching in his hometown. He could afford to. His wife was the wealthiest woman in town, and I mean, she was a master of the town's business. The town's business was getting caravans, taking goods from the Indian Ocean, from Yemen, and transporting them over to Al-Sham, which we call Syria today, on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a big money business, and she did it better than anybody else in town. So Muhammad didn't have to worry about a thing. He could preach every hour of the day if he wanted. And the citizens of Mecca, who had more important things to do with their lives, began to find this an irritation, especially since he was finding his following among slaves and various people they needed in order to carry out their business. And Muhammad had the impression that they wanted to kill him. So he hot-tailed it, hot-footed it out of town, went to
Medina?
Went to Medina. About 220 miles away, a village. I've been trying to research this, but apparently it was largely Jewish town.
Have you been
no,
there?
Never. They don't let Jews. I mean, it's apartheid. They don't let you into Saudi Arabia.
Is that really true? Is that a true fact?
Absolutely true.
I didn't know that. What a pain in the neck.
I mean, every once in a while, somebody like Tom Friedman gets in because he's with the New York Times, but that's an exception. I mean,
you're with the Bloom Report.
I'm with Howard the Humongous. I am Howard the Humongous. So at any rate, and eventually...
Well, where is that coming from?
This comes from. This all comes
from.
But we've got to get to the bottom line here. There's an important point here.
I can't understand why that would be.
Why they would try to kill him?
No, why they wouldn't let a Jew into their. I don't understand. Is it?
Oh, it's real simple.
Is it just from Israel or what? Or what
no,
is it?
There's apartheid out there.
Okay, that's true. Yeah.
And when Muhammad, we're skipping ahead of our story, but eventually Muhammad. No, let's get to it. Okay,
go. Sorry.
Okay, so Muhammad gets off with his followers to Medina. And people put him up in their homes. Well, there's just so much time that a person's going to put you up in their home and feed you. Now, his wife has...
Franklin said they start smelling like a fish after 3 days.
Yeah, okay. Now, his wife has a lot of money. That carries him a certain distance, but not that far.
I was talking about Franklin.
Yeah,
Benjamin
okay.
Franklin.
So... Muhammad comes up with an idea. He knows the caravan trade inside out. His wife was the absolute master of it. He knows when the caravans are going from Mecca to El-Sham to Syria and back again. So he gets the people of Medina together who are willing to be in on this with him, and he starts raiding the caravans coming from Syria back to Mecca. And, you know, he kills a few people and makes off with as many goods as possible, and that makes the people he's staying with rich for the moment and gives them a sense of triumph and victory, which is, you know, a hormonal high. And he's having a great time. Meanwhile,
when did he come up with the Quran and that?
He started coming up with the Quran probably in about 610 A.D. He escaped Mecca to Medina in 622 A.D. And then started this business.
And that was like a recitation that was put down.
Yeah, right.
From a translator.
He started reciting these things that he was getting from the angel Gabriel.
And this thing you said about there was being, who was it that was saying the idea of Mashiach or Messiah?
That was a cousin of his wife.
A cousin of his wife. Right. Was it widely ascribed to him at the time? Was it relevant to his thinking that way?
Oh, it was very relevant to his thinking.
Did they think of it as being part of the book, as they do?
It's why in the beginning of the Quran it says that we shall basically accept and respect the people of the book. because he thought he was about to be accepted by the people of the book. But then later, the entire Quran turns against the people of the book viciously. And I'm about to explain why.
Yeah, okay, that's important. Yeah, it's an important thing.
Right.
Current,
well, he turns against the people of the book because they didn't accept him. The Christians and the Jews did not accept him as the Messiah. He had to build his own following, and his resentment was enormous.
So is he thought of by some of the Islamic faith as Messiah?
No,
or is
not
that
at
a
all.
wrong
There
concept
was a whole different concept.
What about the 12th Imam?
Now that's much later, and I can't
but
claim to be an expert in that.
That's the division between the Shia and the Sunni.
That wouldn't happen for years. Let's do this in chronological order so you understand.
But things are happening last minute. You were just reading things that happened 10 minutes ago.
But until you understand the story in chronological order, you won't understand where all this comes from.
But one of the tyrannies of life is time. We've only got 20 minutes.
Oh my God, we've only got 20 minutes. Basically, so the people in Mecca got fed up.
Yeah.
And they sent a military expedition.
Yeah.
You have to understand what that is. In the words of one Islamic historian, war was the hobby of these people, of these tribes.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So they got together their guys to do what they do for a hobby, and they were going to wipe him out. And they came to Mecca and tried to wipe him out, and they lost. They lost. Well, then, Muhammad did something that's very typical of Muhammad. He didn't just rejoice in his victory and think that God was on his side. Yeah, he did all of that.
Yeah.
He did something else. Some of the guys who'd been killed were the leading men of Mecca. These were the people who had been the most highly regarded figures, the masters of generosity, the masters of wisdom in his hometown when he was a kid, and now they were dead. So what do you do with the bodies if you're Muhammad? He took them and dumped them into a well, deliberately to say, if you can say this on air, that to the people in Mecca.
Okay, what's it? To the people who had ousted him.
Yeah, exactly. Because he was a mean and savage man, because he had no compassion, because violence was his thing. It became his thing. He had no sense of humor. He was a very strange guy. At any rate, then...
This is all understood by scholarship and everything like this?
This is in the Quran.
Oh, in the Quran.
It's in the Hadith. And it's in the first two. The Hadith is all of the collective eyewitness accounts of the things that happened during Muhammad's life from the people who participated in those events with him.
Right.
That's the Hadith.
Right.
And then there are two early biographies of Muhammad and the rise of the Muslims, written for Muslims by Muslims. That's Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari's is 32 volumes long.
Wow.
These are the Islamic sources. These are the sources that crack the code that Osama is using in his documents. These are his vocabulary. So when researching this, I didn't go to Bernard Lewis and the Western experts on Islam. I went to the Muslim sources on Islam. Muhammad spent the next from 622 until 632 AD on a rampage of violence and conquest. And whenever he couldn't win a battle, whenever he couldn't give the people whose house guests he was, whenever he couldn't give them glory and money, glory and goods by winning a battle, he went off and found a suburb of Jews, laid siege to them, and either did an ethnic expulsion, an ethnic cleansing, and took all of their goods, or did, the word that's used in Islam, within Islam, is an extermination, a genocide.
Why the Jews?
Because they were small enough that he could hit them and know he was going to win, and because they had rejected him as their Messiah, because it was easy, Harold, because it always worked.
Did he think of himself as Messiah? Did he think in those terms? Did he present himself? Did the people around him present himself?
No.
That was a big concept?
They presented him, they took another word from the Jews, prophet.
Prophet, okay.
And he was presented as a prophet. And the general idea was that God had sent prophet after prophet to mankind. Some say 120, some say 12,224, and that every one of these prophets had brought exactly the same message. What was that message? Word for word what's in the Quran. And in every case, the people who'd been given that message had screwed it up. They had interpreted it to fit the pattern of their time. And in the process, they had turned a deep and profound truth from God himself into a lie. And Moses was among those prophets who brought you exactly the Quran, word for word. And what did it turn into? The Torah, the Bible. That's not the Quran. Obviously, it's got to be satanic, right? Jesus brought you the Quran. Well, look at the Old Testament and the New Testament. Do you see the Quran in there? No. Obviously, the Christians screwed it up. They got it wrong. They turned it into something satanic.
Okay.
The only prophet that ever got it across right is named Muhammad. And the only people that ever got the message right and didn't screw it up, always looked back to the original, never tried to reinterpret it, are the Muslims. And that's the way he tended to be regarded. That's the way he's regarded now in militant Islamic circles and extremist Islamic circles. But you have to understand something. Muhammad is the guy who invented militant Islam. Muhammad is the guy who invented jihadism. If you look in the Saudi sources...
Do you get militant being a strong word and everything like that, but you get...
It's an understatement
do you
for
get
him.
Okay, so you got an interpretation of that? That's one interpretation of the man.
No, that's not an interpretation.
The
Saudis will tell you exactly how many square meters of territory Muhammad conquered a day.
Well, the thing is, they had a thing on PBS the other night that it would have presented a somewhat different thing in saying that it was a great deal of it was influence that was extended, not necessarily through vicious conflict or anything, but just acceptance.
That's 100 years later.
Well, okay.
And even then, the war of conquest went on.
Well, that would be, you could say that about any imperialist effort, because, you know, Rome built...
With only one difference here.
Rome did a lot of good things that made it possible for that to be called progress, but they still did it with the backing of military might and a mighty warrior kind of attitude toward the Pax Romana.
We have a phrase that we associate with prophets in the West because of the example of Jesus and because people like Isaiah, for all of the nasty things that they may have said, would say things like taking our spears and turning them into pruning hooks and our swords and turning them into plows. That's a deep part of the Western prophetic tradition. The Mohammedan, the Islamic prophetic tradition, is the very opposite. To say, look, there's a great expert on Islam, a master of expert on Islam. His name was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. And he's the George Washington of modern Iran, which does not call itself the Islamic Revolutionary Iran. It calls itself the Islamic Revolutionary State, period, for the world. And he said that to say that any prophet would ever say, turn the other cheek, is a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie perpetrated by those barbarians in the West. How do we know, he says? Our prophets were men who killed, and our great men were men who were killed and were willing to be killed, and he was referring to Muhammad above all. So you have one prophetic tradition in which no matter how bloody the West has been, and it's been very bloody in its imperialism, ultimately, if it turns back to its prophet, it's a man who preached peace. And then you have another religion whose founding figure, who's equivalent to Jesus, preached war until you conquer the entire world. Now, why would you want to conquer the entire world, Harold? Because you have the one truth given to you by God Himself.
Yeah, well, okay, that's not it's not unique to them, but it is unique.
No, but as far as you're concerned, as a Muslim, this is the only truth. Everything else misleads people. As a Muslim, period.
As a Muslim,
if you really believe in the form of Islam preached by Muhammad, there is only one real truth, and it was preached by God Himself to Muhammad. And he is called the one true prophet because he's the only prophet who got it right. Period. And Islam, and if you consult any of the Islamic scholars, and I'm talking about mainstream scholars, not extremists, they will tell you the West has got it wrong about what a religion is. Islam is not a religion in the Western definition. It is a total system of life. It has a judicial system. It has a legal code. It has a military system. What Muhammad ended up running in Mecca was a military dictatorship, a totalitarian military dictatorship that told you even what direction to urinate in. And if you refused, or if you objected, if you voiced any kind of dissent, Muhammad sent his men to get you in the middle of the night, take a sword, plunge it all the way through you to the ground beneath you, and leave you dead. One man did that one night. The people who were the objectors tended to be poets. One of them was 112 years old. He got this treatment. Another one was a woman. She had 5 kids. And one of Muhammad's men went to her place in the middle of the night when she was asleep, because this is the traditional way of handling dissenters, and plunged his sword. He took the baby off of her breast, which was very humanitarian of him, and then took his sword and plunged it all the way through to the ground beneath her. And the next day he went to Muhammad, and he was stricken with remorse. He was guilty. He felt guilty. And he said to Muhammad, "I'm feeling guilty about this. Did I do something wrong?" And Muhammad said, "Absolutely not. The world will care about her as much as it cares about 2 goats butting their heads against each other. And if there is a person who disagrees with me and you fail to kill her, you are defying God himself."
I see. This is a interpretation of what Muslims.
This is not an interpretation.
Oh, no,
this is in the Quran. This is the Hadith.
But this is your view of what the Muslim. What does that? How does that relate to the year 2013?
It's where Al-Qaeda comes from.
Al-Qaeda. Okay, now Al-Qaeda. Okay, Al-Qaeda.
It's where Wahhabism comes from.
Wahhabism also is very, very conservative.
It's the form of Islam that is preached in Saudi Arabia and preached in madrasas all over the world, thanks to an $80 billion campaign from the Saudis.
We just did a program with John Rafferty that we aired earlier, a couple of days ago, and he said that the history of the world is one of terrible, terrible vengeance is being racked down by people, and that actually things have gotten better through time.
Yes, they have gotten better. They've gotten much better through time. In the West, your chance of dying a violent death at the hands of another human being
is much
are
less.
1/9 what they were in 1650.
All of that. So the point being is that, and it looks like, and nature's not all buttercups and butterflies. It's red in tooth and claw. There's a lot of things that are very violent in the universe and that kind of thing. But what is the lesson in terms of that? Wahhabism or Khomeini, I heard you mentioned, or Al-Qaeda, how do they fit in terms of the geopolitics of the world in the year 2013?
All of these things are battling. Today we have, the major thing that's dominating the news is a civil war in Syria.
Right.
Guess what? It's not a civil war.
It's not a civil war in your view. Okay.
It is a proxy war.
Okay.
It's a sock puppet war.
Okay.
And in sock number 1 is Iran.
Okay,
in
you
sock
got it right.
number 2,
now, Iran stands for?
Well, Iran,
it's Shia.
Iran is Shia, but Iran stands for the Ayatollah's interpretation of Islam.
Well, that's the Ayatollah's corporation that is. But it's also Shia.
Yes, it's Shia.
Okay,
right.
And Shia is relatively
and it's
small.
not Arab.
It's not
Remember,
Arab. No, they're Persian.
Islam.
They had Mithra. Mithra was a god, or Mithra was a prophet that predated the monotheistic God that predated the Judaic.
But there's something. Let's go back to
Muhammad.
Muhammad.
Goes way back. It's
Let's
a very
go
long
back.
culture.
We have to go back to Muhammad for a second. Again, why, if you were a dedicated Muslim, would you want to take an American and liberate him, or get him out of the American democratic system and into your system? Because to live by man-made laws is to defy God. God gave us the laws by which we should live. And unless we live by those laws, we're all going to hell.
Yeah, it's a fanaticism.
It's not a fanaticism. This is a totally rational system of belief.
Well, it doesn't sound. It sounds fanatic to me.
But it's a fanaticism that has been a major part of world history for 1,400 years.
Longer.
Now.
It's been part. That's been a trend of history that can be found among the savages that were living in jungles.
But we're talking specifically about the influence of Islam, and it's very important.
Well, Islam. Love is a many-splendor thing. Is there Islam a many-splendor thing? You have crazy sects that involve themselves.
This is the mainstream. You have to understand two things.
Al-Qaeda is the mainstream?
I want to get 2 things in here.
Well, Al-Qaeda is a radical.
Wait, give me a chance to get 2 things.
You only got 5 minutes to get it all across.
Okay.
And where does it all stand?
In 628 AD, God appeared to Muhammad
Well, God appeared to Smith up in New York with the Mormons. I mean, all kinds of nonsense.
But he didn't have that influence. It appeared to him and unrolled the scroll of the world and said, the world all the way to the west shall be yours, and all the way to the east shall be yours. And then he sent out letters to the 6 major emperors of the world as he knew it in his day, inviting them to Islam or else. Now, this is a petty little tribe in the desert. Nobody even knows who they are. You'd think this would go nowhere.
No, I know that,
Within 100 to 150 years, Islam had taken, by following the example of conquest of Muhammad himself, wait, let me finish, by following the pattern of conquest of Muhammad himself.
Well, is it the same for Rome when they
Islam had taken a territory 11 times the size of the conquests of Alexander the Great. 5 times, you bring up Rome, 5 times the size of the Roman Empire, the size of 5 Roman empires.
It extended way out.
Right, and 7 times the size of the United States.
Well, that could be because it
Harold, let me finish.
It was all done by force of
most of it was
to
done by
religious fervor, to the absolute truth. Absolutist truth is what you're saying.
The point is that no belief system in the history of mankind, no political system in the history of mankind, no empire in the history of mankind has ever accomplished anything like it. And we fail to look at it. And if we fail to look at it, we do not understand the real nature of human nature.
What happens to those who say that Islam is a religion of peace and brotherhood? There are people who will say that.
There are people who will say that.
They will say that. You've got a different understanding of the root nature of Islam as in a philosophy and a meaning.
If they are people like Karen Armstrong and John Esposito, who are apologists for Islam, they are lying. But if there are people within Islam, like a friend of mine from Turkey, who said, I went into the Quran and I discovered that everything I've been taught about Islam is false.
Okay.
And I thought, I shuddered, because it's a very violent book, especially against Jews. And I asked him what he found in there. And he said, I found that we're supposed to accept people of all kinds and are supposed to love them. I have many friends like that in the Islamic community, and I love them dearly. And they are the people we have to encourage with all our hearts and might.
They found that in the Quran?
They said so. That's what they think they found there.
Well, I don't know. It's hard to find how they could find it with the story and the view of what you think is intrinsic to it. To find it, you know what the trouble is? There's a tyranny in the universe, and it's called time. There's a tyranny in television that's even more nasty than the universe, and that's time and television. We run out of time. Just got started. We'll have to do some more programming around this, because it's very interesting, and we didn't quite get to all the nuances of the things. You're very carefully following that situation, and Al-Qaeda is a great threat.
Yes.
A great threat, and that's the enemy, more than the enemy, the de jure political enemy of the day.
Well, we have our own internal enemies. Look at the way we're spying on ourselves right now and undermining our democracy.
Yeah, National Security Agency. Okay, listen. Howard, thank you very much.
Harold,
it's good to talk about politics. We've got to do more talking like this. It's your pleasure at the Perception. Then Howard Bloom, very, very interesting, and this is something new and everything like that for our conversation, so I really appreciate it. So we invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again tomorrow on Conversations, and thanks, Howard, very much. Very interesting and very interesting. I'm glad we didn't get a chance to on the many reports. You're reporting to television around the world of your take on things, which is very informed of a particular view, really worth listening to. And give my best to George Gilder when you talk to him. He's a major right-wing kind of person, and certainly Barbara Ehrenreich, who I love dearly. Your pleasure to have his Perception, coming back again tomorrow. Again, Howard Bloom, The God Problem. I'm very highly recommended, How a Godless Cosmos Creates, a major work. And once again, Howard, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Harold.
See you tomorrow, and once again, thanks a lot for viewing. Okay, so that's really something. That's really something.
See, we don't give Islam enough respect. We refuse